All righty. Let me clear this off right here. Welcome, everybody. Epic Investors. It's Matt Terrio from Epic Real Estate, where we show people how to invest in real estate with an emphasis on retiring early. And today we're going to talk about how to invest during times of inflation. And so strap yourself in for that. Get something to write with. You're going to want to take some notes. And, if this is your first time here, really glad that you found us. If you like what you hear, make sure you hit the subscribe button before you go. And if you continue to like what you hear, might as well hit the subscribe or the like button as well. And if this is not your first time here, welcome back. And thank you for sharing this with your friends and family. I really appreciate that about you. You're the absolute best for that. If you didn't know, here for years, I've provided hands down really what I think is the most effective strategies and training for finding motivated sellers, because every deal lies within the seller's motivation to sell. If there's no motivation there's not going to be a deal. And so I even teach my students on how to use creative financing strategies to lock in deals without borrowing from banks or begging friends and family for a loan. But right now, during the holiday season, we are taking it one step further, and we can provide 100% financing for your fix and flips. And so my advice has always been, and it still is, to find the deal first, and the money will then find you. And but I understand that if you've never done a deal before, I understand that can take an inordinate amount of faith to trust that process. So I'm going to help you out with the faith part right now. And I'm going to assure you that the money is already there waiting for you. And so I've made special arrangements just for you. And now you still have to find the deal. That part doesn't change. And that's why I've put together an irresistible no-brainer of an offer for Christmas to help you find deeply discounted off-market properties. So here it is. Let me pull in my screen here. So right there, from now until December 22nd, that's just like tomorrow night. We got like 2 days left of this to go. I'm going to give a max of 50 students the entire Epic Invested Training Vault. That's a $1,591 value for only $297. So that's a gift of $1,294 to you, from me to you. And you also get access to these investor funds. That's going to be included at no additional charge. That will be free. Right. So this is an offer I've never done before. And if you'd like to get the details, you can go to epicchristmasgift.com. epicchristmasgift.com. All righty. So on today's show, we're discussing inflation. And it's a word that's been tough to escape this year, right? The recent reports have us at just shy of a 40-year high. And I've been talking about it here for a while now, and giving it real attention, I would say, in the last 24 months. And it's actually accelerating faster than I thought it would. I was always very aggressive and, I guess, bullish on inflation and having it really appreciate, but I hadn't anticipated moving this fast. And so I guess the big question is, how do you save yourself during these times? What do you need to watch out for? What do you need to be thinking about? How can you actually thrive in an economic environment like this? And so what I did is I invited my really good friend back to the show to discuss these very questions. So please help me welcome Mr. Jason Hartman to the show. And there he is.
Matt, how you doing?
There, just in the nick of time, Jason.
Yeah, that's right, buddy. How you been?
Very good. Have you ever seen that show, the movie 5 Heartbeats?
No, I've never even heard of it.
It was on a singing group from the 50s, I think in the 50s or the 60s. And they open up the show with the whole band starting, and they have this montage of the lead singer diving over through alleys and under trash cans and running through backyards, and he slides in just in the nick of time, just when
getting there. Yeah,
there it is. So that made me think of this.
Good stuff.
Welcome, buddy. Merry Christmas to you.
Hey, thank you. Merry Christmas to you and everybody joining us today. And inflation is definitely the buzzword of the year, just like you were saying. It is. It's crazy. I mean, and I think it's going to get worse. So that's what we have to look forward to.
Certainly looking that way. Before we begin discussing how to invest and get rich in an inflationary environment, I've noticed that occasionally something will kind of start trending, and it'll be kind of come the ethos within the ethos, and it's all consuming, and you're going to hear a certain word or a certain phrase all over the place.
Yep.
And I don't know if it's ever happened to you, but it grows to such a point there where you feel like you're so left behind and you have no idea what they're even talking about, but now you're kind of afraid to ask.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Because everybody should know what "Let's Go Brandon" refers to.
Exactly, that type of thing. Perfect example. So
Yeah.
I think
Right.
inflation is kind of a word kind of like that.
Yeah.
So if we could, and just the way that you explain this concept and this idea so eloquently and so easily to understand, can we just start from the beginning and then we'll go move into how to actually get rich in today's market? So,
Sure. Yeah.
Jason, what is inflation?
Yeah, so that's a good question, and it's good that you start with that because a lot of people don't understand it. They think, well, inflation, well, prices are going up, right? But it's just not that simple. It
Mhm.
never is, right? It never is. So that's the way most people experience inflation. Okay, but technically, that is not inflation exactly. Academically speaking, inflation is really just an increase in the money supply, inflating the money supply. And no one can deny that that has happened in just massive, massive abundance, where money has been created out of thin air. And really, Matt, we should not even use the word money. We should use the word currency, which is a more accurate word. So the US dollar is not money, it is a currency. And these right here that I'm going to hold up for everybody if they're watching the video, these are Zimbabwe dollars, okay? And these are a currency and they are worthless. Money has intrinsic value. So all the gold bugs would say, well, gold is money, right? Gold is money because it has been considered money for many thousands of years. And paper currencies, which always, at least historically, have always reached their intrinsic value, literally the paper they're printed on. And so if you go to Wikipedia, for example, and you type in the word inflation, you're going to see this picture of a woman in Weimar, Germany, the Weimar Republic, which was the early era of, really what led to World War II. And I love it that you put that on the screen here. Let's show that picture. This is great. Good, good job there. And so type inflation, and if unless the entry has changed, you're going to just scroll down there and you're going to see this really telling picture. And maybe this has changed. Now, I looked this up not too long ago, um, but just keep scrolling down there. I bet it's there still because it's just such a telling picture. It's a black and white picture of a woman in Weimar, Germany, shoveling their currency into a furnace, right? And the moral of that story, and yeah, you can just find the image if you just look it up. Maybe it's not in Wikipedia anymore, or it's on one of the following pages. And the moral of that story is the intrinsic value of the currency, the Weimar currency, was literally only to produce heat. That's all it was actually worth. And there are stories as they experience their incredible inflation. There are stories of people getting robbed, right? Because it was desperate time. And there's this one story of there you go. That's the picture. The second one there, Matt. That's the one right there. Look at that. Yep. And this other story that's really interesting about that
Is she using that for
is
fire, like to keep warm?
yeah, just to keep warm. That's the
Yeah,
intrinsic value,
that's remarkable.
right? That's
Mhm.
all it was worth because it cost more money. It wasn't worth it to trade the currency for wood to burn, right? Which would have been much more efficient and last much longer in the furnace. It
Right.
wasn't worth it to trade that. It was just simply worth it to just throw the currency into the furnace and burn it. Could you imagine doing that with dollar bills? Maybe that's the point we're going to come to someday. And the way things are going, it's looking like that could happen. So there's this other story. I'll just tell you one more, and then we'll move on to the meat and potatoes here, if you will, uh, of someone in Weimar, Germany, pre World War II, uh, taking a wheelbarrow full of currency, right? Full of cash. They had a wheelbarrow full of it, and they wanted to go into a store to buy something, just to buy some food items. And the wheelbarrow wouldn't fit through the door. It was too wide. And so they left it for just a minute, ran in to buy something, and someone dumped all the currency out and ran off with a wheelbarrow because the wheelbarrow was worth more than the heavy load of all that currency, right? So we've got to understand that currency is really just a symbol. And, people understand this a lot better since the era of Bitcoin. When Bitcoin came around, a lot of people started understanding monetary policy and using a lot of the buzzwords, like one of the buzzwords you hear often. And now more people understand this than ever. When I started talking about this, 18 years ago, people like, one person in a big room of 100 people understood what I was talking about. But, the term we hear a lot now is fiat money or fiat currency. And fiat, that word just means by authority or by decree. That's all it means. And that means that, the dollar, whether it be the US dollar or the Zimbabwe dollar, and by the way, this is 100 trillion Zimbabwe dollars. I just want you to notice that. I'm rich.
Right.
That's just a symbol, right? But I do want to moderate that saying with, people dismiss the US dollar too quickly. Okay. So let's just be reasonable about this and have a balanced viewpoint on it. Yes, of course, they say things like the US dollar isn't backed by anything, and that's why I'm buying gold or silver or Bitcoin or whatever, right? They say stuff like that.
Yep.
And that's not true either. Okay. The US dollar is backed by something. It may not be backed by gold, and that's true, but it is backed by aircraft carriers, nuclear missiles, police forces, standing armies. It is backed. There is no question about it.
Sure.
It is backed by the most powerful military the world has ever known. And so to say that it's not backed by anything is just, that's just silly. Okay. It doesn't make any sense. So, let's have some balance in that conversation. But what we can do is, as investors, especially in the most historically proven asset class the world has ever known, income property, right? It's by far and away the best asset class because it has these really special multi-dimensional characteristics where we earn our return from a lot of different ways, right? We don't just earn it one way. Think about it. If you buy gold, since we've talked about gold, or precious metals, silver, platinum, palladium, whatever, right? It's a single strategy. Buy low, sell high. That's the whole game. That's it. Nothing else, right? If you buy a non-dividend paying stock, the whole strategy is buy low, sell high. There's nothing else to it. If you buy a dividend paying stock, you get two strategies. You get buy low, sell high, get income or dividends in between. That's better, right? But income property gives you return from so many ways. Yes, buy low, sell high, sure. Buy low, refinance high. Buy low, or buy at market, buy high and refinance higher, buy high, sell higher. That might be the one for today because everybody thinks it's so expensive, which, by the way, is a bit of a misnomer too. But you get income, you get depreciation. And when I say depreciation, I mean the good kind, meaning the best tax benefit offered of all, which is depreciation.
Real quickly, Jason, before we go,
principal pay down. Yeah, go ahead.
But before we go too deep into like the strategy and what to do, and I want to get there because I love having this conversation with you.
Yep.
But can you explain, like, we're looking at the last inflation numbers came out was 6.8%, approaching a 40-year high, just shy of the 40-year mark. But if I look at, and I did this example in a presentation about a month ago, if you go to a Subway sandwich, you go to their website, the $5 foot long is now 6 inches long. So to me, that's like, okay, your money was just cut in half.
Yeah.
Right.
That's called shrinkflation, by the way. Shrinkflation is the word for that one. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And then, my wife's Starbucks latte is $1 more than it was this time last year. So that's like a 25% increase. You notice, and everyone's noticing it at the gas pumps right now. Where does this 6.8% number come from, where the real world number is 25 and above %?
Yeah, well, it depends on the item. So inflation is measured most commonly by the CPI, or the consumer price index, right? And that is highly manipulated. It's manipulated in three major ways: weighting, substitution, and hedonic indexing. Okay, three major ways they manipulate the index. So basically, what that means is okay, there's a basket of goods which comprises the CPI or the consumer price index. And all the things in that basket, they can change the weight of them. So they make these assumptions that, hey, look, if the cost of bread goes up too much, we'll just change the weighting, and assume people aren't eating as much bread as they used to, and we'll put the weighting more on some item that hasn't increased as much or inflated as much. And so
So the
they
basket
rely.
of goods that you hear all the time, they're actually considered like they're visualizing a real basket of goods, like what someone would normally go to the supermarket and buy.
Well, no, it's not just that. It's got all kinds of things in it. Like one for real estate is called owner's equivalent rent. And
Okay.
that's a whole rabbit hole there. Okay. So if you want to learn about how they apply it to real estate or housing, look up owner's equivalent rent.
Okay.
Okay. And go down that rabbit hole. It'll take you a while, I promise, because they do everything to confuse what we all see in our daily life, which is totally simple. We know prices are rising like crazy. They're rising much more than the 7% give or take that they're telling us. So
Right.
waiting, okay, substitution. Price of beef goes up. They assume everybody will switch to chicken, but maybe you think chicken's a dirty bird and you don't like chicken, right? So substitution. Hedonic indexing. This iPhone, this was about $1,500, right? And my first phone was $3,200, and all it did was make phone calls. That's all it did, and
Mhm.
it weighed 14 pounds, right? So, this phone now is much better. There's no question. But what they do is they index the cost down because the technology keeps getting so much better, and they assume that you paid less for the phone than you really did because they hedonically adjust the price of it.
Got it.
Now, okay, that's actually kind of logical, right? I
Mhm.
can buy that theory, but here's the problem, Matt. It basically says to all of us that we as people are not entitled to progress. The consumer price index gets the benefit of progress. We don't. So imagine if they hedonically indexed from the invention of the light bulb. Or how about this? The wheel.
Mhm.
It'd be like everything is totally free, and it's not free, right? We
Right.
all know. So,
Well, the
so
other part of that is like with that $3,500 phone that you had that only made phone calls,
that was
you don't have
3,200. Yeah,
30, you don't have the option to buy just a phone that makes just phone calls anymore,
yeah, right.
right?
That's
So
true. Yeah,
you couldn't take it down to $10 for a phone that just made outbound calls type thing.
that's a good point. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
not that product isn't available anymore.
Right. Right.
Not that you'd really want it anyway, but yes,
No,
true.
but I mean, if we're gonna the apples and apples thing, I was just
Yeah.
kind of thinking about
Right.
that.
No, they
Totally.
manipulate the index. Now they do it one more way. Let me tell you one more. Okay,
Hmm.
you might have heard this phrase around. They say core inflation. Okay,
Yes.
so for core inflation, or what's also known as the core rate. Okay, what they do is they take the CPI, which is already a scam. Okay,
Hmm.
and they manipulate it again, and they say, look, there are two items in the CPI that they're just so volatile. We need to take them out. Food and energy.
Hmm.
Now, look, the cost of energy is in everything.
Right.
Everything takes energy to get a product to market, to manufacture it, to whatever. Energy's the cost of energy is everywhere. Okay, that's like air; it's just everywhere. Okay,
Hmm.
so they strip out food and energy because they're too volatile. It's the most absurd thing ever, right? I mean, nobody can live without food and energy.
Right.
Okay, so that's even more of a scam.
Got it.
Yeah,
It is, and they do this to us, but we have to play the game, right? We don't have really any control over it.
right.
So to play the game, I mean, I guess there's a game of survival, and then there's a game of being able to thrive and really make this work for you.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
So, and we hear about, and I was just pulled this up this morning as I was trying to get some sort of current news footage of for our conversation today. And I just stumbled across this accidentally. And this is like something that most people will go to as their hedge against inflation is they're going to buy the precious metals, and then the headline is gold is losing its status as an inflation hedge. And we looked at the prices over the last probably 10 years. It's kind of virtually unchanged. Hasn't done too much, but the inflation has certainly skyrocketed. It certainly hasn't kept up.
Right.
So I guess what are some of the things that like best practices you can do in this type of environment?
You can do exactly what the two most powerful entities the human race has ever known are doing and have been doing for a very long time.
Hmm.
So, those two most powerful entities are governments and central banks. And they are doing the exact plan that I'm about to share with all of you.
Perfect.
And I have a name for it. And if you can let me share my screen, Matt, I got some visuals for you if you want them.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me see how I can do that. This is a new software feature for me
Yeah, I
here.
know. I haven't used
Do you have the
Restream.
ability to hit the little plus button there?
Yeah, well, yeah, it looks like I can share it. Okay, do you see it? No, it's in the green room. Yeah. Okay, there you go. So last time we talked, Matt, we talked about the Hartman Comparison Index, and I just wanted to let all of your people know that we now finally have published for public consumption white paper 2.0 on that. So if you want that, it's free. You can just go to jasonhartman.com, get on our list, and we'll get you the white paper. Okay, it's 17 pages long that explains basically why real estate is not nearly as expensive as many people think it is. Okay. So you can get that. But the technique I was talking about a moment ago is called inflation induced debt destruction. And this, even though it's a mouthful, this is the plan that Jerome Powell, that the US government, Jerome Powell is the chair of the Federal Reserve, and I just mean the Federal Reserve, really not him personally, but he's the chairman, have been using for decades to inflate away their debt. And there are many nuances to this. So let's go ahead and dive into it. But first, let's kind of talk about the problem for a minute. I was talking with Ken McElroy, Ken, and he's one of the Rich Dad authors, and we started a business together, a mastermind group called The Collective. And in my talk with him, I was talking to him about my portfolio and my investments. And Matt, I bet you felt this way before. I was saying to Ken, I said, man, I am just long on everything. I'm long on real estate. I'm long on, and I don't own much of this other stuff, but Bitcoin, stocks, everything I'm long, which means I'm expecting it to increase in price, right?
Right.
Versus going short on something, which means you're betting that it will decline and you're going to make money from the short.
Hmm.
And I thought about that after that conversation. I thought, but really, I'm incredibly short on one thing, the U.S. dollar, and I'm shorting the U.S. dollar by the way I'm structuring my real estate deals. And hopefully, all of you will take something from this today and take advantage of the same thing on how to really short the dollar. So, if we talk about the problem a bit, we've got these two big spenders, that just love to spend. I mean, Ronald Reagan had this great saying. He said, he used the old saying. He said, "To say that the government spends money like a drunken sailor is an insult to drunken sailors." Because the government spends even more and even worse than the drunken sailors do. And so we know that they're big spenders. We know that government is spending money it simply doesn't have and definitely cannot repay. And I'll dive into that a little bit right here. But I've identified 6 ways that the government can really get out of this mess, right? What does it do to solve its problem? Now, the first thing it could do is it could simply default. It could say to all the people it's made promises to, all the people that are taking advantage of Obamacare and getting free or subsidized health care, all of the people that get various government college scholarships, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, disability payments, every government benefit, the National Endowment to the Arts, the public parks, all of this stuff. I mean, the government does so much stuff, it's absolutely insane, right? It could simply say, look, we're sorry, we've overspent, we can't keep our promises, and so we're going to simply default. We're not only going to default to the American people, but we're going to default to all the other countries we owe money to, like China, for example. And this is extremely unlikely. because it would be political suicide. And we saw what happened in Greece and many other places around the world when they instituted austerity measures. This is not a popular thing, and it's very, very unlikely that it would ever happen. Okay, the government could raise taxes. Hey, eat the rich. Okay, they're taking too much. They're not contributing enough. That's the pitch. But there are simply not enough taxes to raise. Let me give you an example. So the GDP, the gross domestic product, in other words, the entire value of the US economy in 1 year is just over $20 trillion. 20 trillion with a T. Now that's another highly manipulated thing, just like inflation rates, just like unemployment rates, all of this stuff. But it's there, right? So this GDP is manipulated. But let's go with their number and let's call it $20 trillion. Now, not only has the government made too many promises and spent too much money today and in the past, but it has also made these promises way into the future. And these are called unfunded entitlements or unfunded mandates. And on my podcast, The Creating Wealth Show, I've had Lawrence Kutlikoff, the economist, on several times. And he has done possibly the most detailed, in-depth study on this stuff. And this was before COVID, these numbers. So they're much higher now. I don't know the latest number, but it's a lot higher, I'll tell you that. Pre-COVID numbers were that these unfunded obligations the government has promised were $220 trillion. That's with a T. Okay, now, the GDP of the country is about 20 trillion. So that means if the government stopped spending today and taxed everybody at 100% tax rate, meaning we're all slaves, okay? And we don't get to keep a penny of what we earn. We have to go and work hard and give it all to the government. And that would be $20 trillion a year in revenue for the government. Well, currently it gets about $4 trillion a year in tax revenues, right? So if we taxed everybody at 100%, which I doubt many people would keep working, okay, if that happened, it would take 11 years to pay for the promises the government has already made without making any new promises, which, as you know, every election cycle, new promises are made. So you simply cannot tax your way out of the problem. It's mathematical impossibility. It just can't happen. Okay, well, look around the country. The country has assets. It has land. The U.S. government has a lot of federal land that it owns. It owns real estate. And so, we could sell the ports to Dubai. Remember, that was in the news about 10 years ago. It didn't happen, but it could have happened. The Bureau of Land Management sells off land to real estate developers from time to time. We could sell military equipment to high-tech military equipment to countries that maybe we shouldn't sell it to just because we need the money, right? So there are all these options. We could have a yard sale, right? But that is selling off assets. That's cannibalizing ourselves. And that's not a good idea. And, it hasn't been historically what we've done. Okay, we could use the US government to steal resources and assets from other countries. And you might think, well, that would be so evil and awful. Well, it's the history of the entire world. That's the way the map of the world was drawn, is by one country stealing and pillaging resources from another country. That's how we came at the map we have. Okay, that's just history. That's the way it is. And maybe the most famous one for this is Napoleon, right? Napoleon did this in spades. In fact, that was one of his criteria. He literally thought, who is the richest country around us that we can just invade and steal their assets? I mean, just study Napoleon. That's what he did. That's what he did for a living, okay? That was the thing. Okay, enough negativity. Let's talk about some positive stuff. How about technological innovation? There may be a technology or a series of technologies that kind of save the world. It's possible, right? That could enrich the economies of the world, that could enrich government coffers. I mean, the stuff I'm talking about when it comes to the government is not just the United States. This is virtually true of pretty much every government around the world is in trouble like this. Okay. It's just that the US can get away with a lot more because it has the reserve currency of the world. Back in 1944, when all the nations met in the dying days of World War II, they agreed to this Bretton Woods Treaty, and they call it that because the conference was held in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. And when they did this, they agreed that the US dollar would be the currency of the world, that all international trade would take place in the US dollar. And it made the US really the supreme country on planet Earth because it was the only major country that still had its industrial powerhouse. It wasn't destroyed by the war. And the U.S. did a lot of very smart things after that. It instituted, during World War II, Lend-Lease to finance basically military equipment for the Allied forces. After World War II, it instituted the Marshall Plan, which was extreme American generosity. I mean, America basically rebuilt the world, including its enemies, like Japan, okay, which was trying to just destroy the United States during the war. But the U.S. quickly realized that we've got to rebuild these other countries. Number one, so we can expand the pie, we can expand the global economy, and so that we can be the hegemon. We can be the hegemon of the world and really just call the shots. And it was a really good investment. And it was not only good for humanity, but it was good for the United States too. Okay, and so that's where we are. But maybe some big innovation in areas of biotechnology, nanotechnology, energy, whatever, right, will come and kind of save humanity. Right? It is possible, but the most likely outcome will be the last one: inflation. And the governments of the world, especially the US, will inflate its way out of the problem. And why would it do this? Because it wants to take advantage of inflation-induced debt destruction. Okay? Now, let's dive into understanding this a little bit. To understand and get excited about this opportunity, we have to understand some things, right? So we need to understand the difference between real and nominal. So if I had a US dollar in front of me and I said, what's this called? And the year was 1980, for example. Any one of you would say, well, Jason, duh, it's called a dollar. What do you think? I mean, stupid question, right? And then I held it up and said, today, what's it called? It's still called a dollar. Name hasn't changed. And that's what nominal means. Nominal means in name only. So, but nominal is different than real. Real is the value of it. The value of that dollar back in 1980, 41 years ago, was significantly higher than it is today. So real and nominal, big difference. All right. So we also need to understand that inflation is the insidious hidden tax that destroys our purchasing power. Just as we were talking about at the beginning, it's a destruction of our purchasing power. It is a robber and a thief. It's a pickpocket. And it destroys the value of our savings, our stocks, our bonds, and even our equity in real estate. Now, you might think, well, aren't we all here as real estate investors talking about how great real estate is? Well, yes, but we have to understand that anything denominated in the currency that is being inflated is getting destroyed. It's getting debased, it's getting devalued. So our stocks, our savings, our bonds, but also our equity in real estate is denominated in what? Dollars. So if you have $1 million equity in a portfolio of real estate and inflation comes along, it is devaluing that equity. But thankfully, it also destroys the value of our debt. And that's what I'm really going to talk about today in detail and give you a specific example.
Yeah, before you go there, Jason, and I've seen you give this presentation before, and I was following all along, but that equity part that you spent a little bit of time on, I was still having a hard time like really grasping that, just because You talk about that $1 million of equity that might be in your portfolio.
Right.
2 years ago, it was 800,000. So we inflated 20% and our equity went up 20%.
Well, that's a good question. The question is, will that equity buy you more, or has it just kept pace with inflation, right? Is it because the dollar in which the equity is denominated has gone down, or is it that the value of the equity has actually gone up?
Mhm.
That's the thing we have to ask ourselves. And the answer is complicated, right? It's like my
Right.
favorite relationship status on Facebook. It's complicated.
Mhm.
I always thought that was hilarious that there's actually a choice. It's complicated. And that's what inflation is. It's complicated because it's uneven, right? It's very uneven. We all have a different consumer price index because we all spend differently, right? No two people spend exactly the same. So
Mhm.
our CPI, our personal CPI for you and Mercedes is different than mine, right?
Right.
Because we spend a little differently. So
Okay.
does that help? The question
Yeah.
is, did the asset go up or did the value of the currency go down?
Right.
Right? That's the
Right.
okay. So
Understood.
go ahead. Something
No,
else?
understood. Go ahead. I
Okay.
like the debt destruction thing is awesome.
So on my podcast years ago, I had a guy that definitely had his 15 minutes of fame on my show, Joe the plumber. You remember Joe the plumber in 2008? He went up to Obama at a rally and he said, "Obama, you're going to redistribute my wealth." And so he became famous for that line, and that was all over the campaign trail back in 2008. And so I interviewed Joe the plumber, and he's a fun guy. And he was implying that Obama was going to increase taxes and redistribute wealth. And that is the most common method of wealth redistribution that people notice, but it's not the most powerful. It's much more powerful to redistribute wealth through inflation than taxation. Why is that? It's because inflation is subtle and it's not understood by people very well. And it redistributes wealth in a couple of ways. It redistributes wealth from lenders to borrowers, and although it's behind my image on the screen there, from old to young. Okay, so from lenders to borrowers, because you borrow money. If you're the lender, well, let's take it from the lender. You lend money in today's dollars and you get it back in tomorrow's dollars that are worth less. If you're the borrower, you borrowed in today's dollars and then you pay it back in tomorrow's dollars, which are worth less. Okay. So that's what the government wants to do. That's what the government is doing to China and all other countries that it owes money to. It's inflating away its own debt. It's a fantastic business plan. Why does it redistribute from old to young? Well, it redistributes from old to young because most of the time, old people have assets like savings, stocks, bonds, and equity in real estate, and young people typically have debt. So, this is an intergenerational wealth transfer without an inheritance, without anybody dying. Nobody has to die to have this redistribution. It's going on through inflation while everybody's still alive. Okay. All right. So this is an interesting video, but in the interest of time, I'm not going to go through it today. You can find it on my podcast. There's more to it there, but it's just too long to go through right now. Okay, but here's the thing to understand. And I noticed this when I lived in the Socialist Republic of California. And Matt, we're both from California, so maybe you noticed it there too.
Yes.
When the
Probably.
government is broke, it becomes predatory on its citizens. Okay. So it is not pleasant to live under a desperate government because they will find ways to tax you that may not be obvious, like raising your income tax rate. They'll just give you more parking tickets. They'll change the rules so that more people become victims of government fines. And sadly, this is what's going on in our prisons. Just a little uh, tangent here. I mean, we imprison more people in this country than any other country on a per capita basis, more than North Korea. I mean, it's insane because prison has become a profitable enterprise and there are privatized prisons. And initially, I was kind of for that, but I'm definitely against it now. Because you don't want to make it profitable for someone to take away someone's freedom, right? And the government makes money from the prison industrial complex. It's just awful what's happening. So there are a lot of ways that the government goes and sort of taxes us. Policemen, while I'm all for policemen, I do not want to defund them. I think that's absolute stupidity. But policemen, to some extent, part of their job is being the modern day tax collector. When you see the guy there, the cop doing his job with the radar gun, that's a tax. Okay. It's all in the name of public safety always, but, and, to some extent that is true, but it's also a way to tax, right? And so just understand and notice that in your life. Okay. All right. So, Matt, you ready for a real life example?
Yes.
All right. So this might sound like some theory that's interesting, but what do we do? And does it really work in real life? And did it happen to other people? Yes, it did happen to millions of other people. And it's happened all throughout history, especially since 1971. Why? Because in 1971, Richard Nixon, our president at the time, ended the Bretton Woods Treaty. Okay, that started in 1944, and the last component of it was basically ditched in 1971 when he gave this famous speech on August 15th, 1971, and said that he was going to temporarily suspend the convertibility of dollars to gold temporarily. And now it's 50 years later, and it still hasn't changed. The world accepted that, and it's an amazing scam, and it's amazing we got away with it. Now, it wasn't like Nixon's scam, it was the United States' scam. It was America's scam against the world, right? But hey, we got away with it, and it worked. And this created a lot of American prosperity that I argue would never have occurred if we didn't have that event in 1971. And sadly, it created a lot of wealth inequality, which you can just see it. Like I could show you a number of charts that just show you how in 1971, that was the inflection point for when the haves and the have-nots started getting really unequal, and the middle class came under attack, and it's been under attack ever since. A great book recommendation is by Lou Dobbs, who was the CNN anchor, and I think he was a Fox anchor, or I don't know what he's doing now. I haven't kept track of him. But he wrote a great book called War on the Middle Class. I highly recommend this book, War on the Middle Class. I discovered it maybe in 2004, 2005. It's an excellent book. Okay, so in 1972, that's where we're going to start our talk about this, War on the Middle Class. And Matt, you're really good about putting stuff in the chat. Excellent work there. He's bringing you good stuff, everybody. All the resources. You got them right.
It's a new software. It's got buttons and stuff everywhere. So it's like a full production going on right now. So yeah. You keep doing what you're doing. You're the talent today.
Okay, cool.
All right.
So we're going to start at 1972. And in 1972, since no time had passed, a dollar was worth a dollar. Okay? Nothing had changed yet. And in 1972, if you go forward 12 years from 1972, you go to 1984, that dollar was now only worth 40 cents. So think about how extreme that is. In 12 short years, the dollar lost 60% of its value. That's insane. That's absolutely insane. I mean, 12 years is nothing, okay? 60%, poof, evaporated. The dollar was still called a dollar, but it was only worth 40 cents 12 years later. All right? By 2001, we're looking now basically 30 years later, the dollar was only worth 24 cents. And we all intuitively know this is true because we live it every day. We've seen this inflation happen over the years. Now, in 1972, if you wanted to get a 30-year mortgage, you would have had to pay 7.37% because that was the mortgage rate for a 30-year fixed loan at the time. But After inflation devalued that mortgage debt, the real interest rate you would have paid, the effective interest rate after inflation, was only 1.06%. Not a bad deal, huh? Now, how stupid were all those people that did not understand this, that said, hey, let's make 13 payments a year and pay off our mortgage in half the time? Or let's pay our mortgage every 2 weeks and accelerate the paydown. Terrible idea. In fact, just to illustrate that, I have a good sound effect. Bad idea. Okay. Much better to keep that mortgage because that mortgage was being paid off by inflation. But wait, there's more, as they say on late night TV. But wait, there's more. Remember, mortgage interest is tax deductible. Now, everybody has a different tax rate. I understand that. But I'm just going to give you kind of a general example here on average, right? What benefit someone would have gotten. And when we do the math and we take not only the inflation induced debt destruction, which makes the mortgage only 1.06%, but we take the tax deductibility of the interest, then we literally got paid to borrow the money. Our interest rate we thought was 7.37, was then debased by inflation, and then further debased by tax deduction. So let's look at a summary. If someone bought the median priced house in 1972, they paid just over $14,000. In nominal dollars, in name only, they repaid over $36,000. But in real dollars, they only paid just over $16,000. Making that interest rate 1.06%. After tax real dollars, they paid less than they borrowed. Really let that sink in. They borrowed $14,600, but after taxes and inflation, they only repaid $12,655, making their effective interest rate negative 1.16%. They got paid to borrow. Oops, that slide was in there from another thing. And I've got this whole chart, which I just summarized for you, that goes over year by year, what the inflation rate was and all of this stuff. But that's basically the scoop. Questions, comments, skepticism. I love skeptics. So
yeah, so go ahead and we got a few more minutes left before Jason has to run. But fire in your questions there in the chat box. If you enjoy what you're seeing today, go ahead and hit the like button, hit the subscribe button if you're not already. And I've got so our actual subject of today's conversation was how to invest during an inflation. And you showed this great example of if you purchase property, in 1972 or 71 it was, and what that actually would have cost you going through the full cycle of the full term of your loan. The great example, if we were to say, look at that today, where an interest rate on an income property might be 3.5–4%, depending on where your credit score is. And we just had inflation at 6.8%. Am I doing the math correctly? We're getting paid 3% to borrow money right now?
Oh, yeah, Matt. This is the first time in probably anybody who's watching this lifetime. It's possible you were alive when this happened before. We weren't, but someone listening or watching might be. And basically, the deal was that this is the first time in our lifetimes that the stated rate of inflation is below the 30-year fixed rate mortgage rate. Normally, it's the nominal the real rate of inflation is higher than the fixed rate mortgage. But today, the stated rate is of inflation is higher than the mortgage. So literally, they're not even trying to fool us now. They're saying go out and stock up on those 30-year fixed rate mortgages. And one more thing that's very important to understand with that example I just shared. This is super important. Make sure you all hear this. That example was on an owner-occupied house. So they got paid to live there for 30 years. They got paid to borrow the money. But what if that was a rental property where you actually got the tenant paid the mortgage, you didn't even pay it. And maybe they paid you positive cash flow of $200 a month extra. I mean, the return is astronomical. This is why income property is the most historically proven asset class in the entire world, because it's got these unique characteristics.
Right, right. So, in summary, it would be to borrow money as much as you can to buy as much income producing real estate as you can.
As long as you're buying sensible properties that will pay the debt for you.
Right,
Okay. If you can't, this is not likely to work out well if you go buy properties in Los Angeles, for example, that are
hmm,
expensive, where the deal will never cash flow. Okay. Now, you don't have to even have it positive cash flow, just break even. Like that would be pretty good in today's world with these higher prices. But, you know, if you buy a negative cash flowing property, an expensive property that won't work in a
right,
cyclical market, and that market turns and you have to feed that property, you could end up, ruining this whole possibility here. Okay, you
right.
got to buy sensible properties.
Yeah, that was a given for me in my head, but
Yeah,
thank you
but
for
not
clarifying.
everybody knows that. So I
Yeah,
just want
no,
to make
totally.
sure
I
somebody
take some
knows
of
that.
those things for granted
Yeah,
sometimes.
it doesn't
A
work for
couple,
everybody. Yeah, because if
right,
you're
right.
making bad decisions, they're still bad decisions.
Yeah, it's Kiyosaki says there's no bad investments, just bad investors, right?
Yeah,
And very good.
could be.
All right, so here's a question from Wendy. Are you worried about rental income if the government steps in and doesn't make renters pay again?
A little bit. The whole eviction moratorium, really, we were very worried about that when it was announced, but it turned out to be just a nothing burger. It was like a non-issue. Literally, like we have thousands of clients that have purchased properties from us all over the country over the many years, and they were worried, we were worried, and we thought, oh God, this whole thing is going to be a disaster, right? But it just turned out to be like a non-issue. The people that experienced more problems with that were people that were in the apartment space. The multifamily properties experienced a lot more non-payers. And so in the single family space, keep in mind, even with that moratoriums and stuff, if people took advantage of it or took advantage of you as a landlord, they still hurt their credit. You were still able to literally sue your tenant while they were occupying the property and get a judgment against them for not paying. Okay, while they were occupying, you just couldn't kick them out on the street. That was the only thing, and it just turned out to be a non-issue. Now, I do want to say though, here's my caveat, and that is that you want to buy properties in landlord friendly markets, generally markets that are politically leaning to the right, because those are the places where you're not likely to have these problems. Okay, even if the rule is federal, okay, even if the CDC says you can't evict anybody, right? Those courts in good markets that we recommend, like that are on my website at jasonhartman.com, those are landlord friendly markets, and you as a landlord have rights, and the courts and the regulatory environment tend to uphold landlord rights there. You go to court in California, you are instantly considered the big evil landowner, and they don't care what happens to you.
Right,
Yeah.
right. One thing I noticed, and you hear that narrative or that type of question or something in that context all the time. Why would you want to buy a rental property if no one's going to pay their rent and if the government can just turn it off on you real quickly? And I always referred to this, which I thought was an extraordinary chart on this is the National Home Renter or something like that. What's this place called? The NMHC.org. Anyway, they track their rents. And here are July, August, September, October, November, December. Then we have them divided by our years into three different categories. And if you just look at like 2019 pre-COVID, 2020 during COVID, here we are in 2021, there are little drops, but it's relatively flat. And this is how many people are actually paid by the 6th of the month. But if you
Right.
scroll down to where they have the actual overall, so 95%, pretty much everybody is paid in whole and complete by the end of the month.
Yeah.
So although people paying rent can sometimes be a challenge for landlords, not that much. And even if it is a problem, it was not a COVID problem. It was not an eviction moratorium problem. So the numbers are essentially the same all the
Yeah.
way down. Like it never goes below 90%.
Yeah, right. Yeah, no, that's a really good point, Matt. I'm glad you showed those charts. Thanks for sharing them.
Mhm.
Also, what I was alluding to before is that the renters you get in single family homes generally are just better quality renters. They're not as transient. They care about their future. They care about their credit report. They want to buy a house someday. They want to keep their kids in that school district and in that single family home. They don't want to upset their family. Like it's just a different kind of tenant than you get in apartments. And look, we've both owned apartments. I mean,
Yep.
you can make money in anything, okay, if you do it right. I'm just saying it's just a different animal. That's all.
Yep. Yep. Here's another question. I'm not sure if I totally understand it. Maybe you do. What about runaway taxes on property that may compensate for
Oh, well,
inflated real
just
estate
property
appreciation?
tax increases. Yeah. Well,
Right.
that's a concern, I mean, but those taxes go to the municipality, so they don't really relate to what I was just talking about, okay? About, the government. I'm talking about the federal government there. But the property taxes, they could affect your local environment. And property taxes are going up already because the price of the house is going up. So that's how they tax us with this inflation scam is the nominal dollars versus real dollars, right? Maybe you got a raise and your income went up in nominal dollars, but in real dollars, did it go up? No. And the government said, well, hey, guess what? We're not raising taxes. But guess what it did? It kicked you up into a higher tax bracket.
Mhm.
So you got a tax increase just by getting that pay raise, and now you're paying more in tax. The same thing happens with properties. When they appreciate, your property tax goes up. Okay,
Right.
so
Right.
that's another way they tax you through inflation.
What are some of the things can the average person do? We talk about this war on the middle class. So let's just kind of look at the middle class, the average middle class person. What can they do if they can't really afford big inflation hedge type investments?
Well, if you've got $25,000, you can get a single family home. It may
Hmm.
not be the best single family home, but you can get in the game. I mean,
Right.
my first property was a cheap, crappy little one bedroom condo I bought when I was 20 years old. Okay. Just get in the game and do the best you can with what you have. That's all anybody can do.
Hmm. Perfect. Some things that come to mind was definitely try and take advantage of your FHA loan.
Yeah.
You can get in
Yeah.
for
Yeah,
3%.
you can do house hacking. You can move in
Live
and
there
then
for a
turn it
minute
into a
and move.
rental.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Partnering is another good
You
thing
you
as well.
you partner, and Matt, you help people partner through your network. I think you do that.
Yep.
Um,
Absolutely.
yeah, and so you can get an epic partnership, okay? And
Right.
and then yeah, you can also buy a duplex on an FHA or VA loan if you qualify and rent half of it, right? And
Sure.
and you're basically house hacking. So that's a way to get
Sure.
in with less.
All right, let's wrap it up with this one. I don't know if it's relevant, but that's a good question. Are 1031s going to be evacuated?
Well, it doesn't look like that's going to
Right.
happen. We were all concerned about that with Let's Go Brandon wanted to take them away. It doesn't look like that's going to happen, but it could happen someday. And,
Hmm.
that's just, let's hope it doesn't. But
I know.
I mean, look, you got to remember these politicians have to answer to their constituents. They want to stay in power. They're greedy, power hungry criminals, most of them. Okay. And, that if you took away the 1031 exchange, that would just have so many ripple effects throughout the housing market and throughout the economy. It would be disastrous. I mean,
Hmm.
so it's just unlikely. Housing has always been this sacred cow, and it's likely to stay that way. It's just too big a part of the economy to mess with
Right.
it.
Yeah, it's a good thing that a lot of those big threats that were coming down that everyone was a little scared of, 6 months ago, 12 months ago, have
Yeah.
all just kind of slowly disappeared one by one.
Yeah.
Totally. Well, Jason, I know you got to run. I appreciate you being here, buddy. Thank you so much. And we'll
All
stay
right.
in touch and we'll continue to do this over and over again.
Hey, it's my pleasure, Matt. Happy investing to you and all your followers and viewers and listeners. And I look forward to talking to you soon.
All right. Take care, bud. Alrighty, so that wraps it up for this epic show. If you found this episode valuable, who else do you know that might too? There is a good chance that you know someone else who would. And when their name comes to mind, please share it with them and ask them to click the subscribe button when they get here, and I'll take great care of them too. Alrighty, God loves you, and so do I. Merry Christmas to you. Happy New Year. Health, peace, blessings, and success to you. I'm Matt Terrio. living the dream.